Hi, everyone. I'm Shaun Moore, the CEO of Trueface. Trueface is a computer vision company out of the United States that focuses on pattern recognition in real-time video feeds, so real-time video analysis and stills. I'm here today to talk about facial recognition and the intelligent decisions that we can make based on this information. It's important first to understand what facial recognition is. It's a mathematical representation of a face, meaning that everyone's face has a different representation based on that different vendor. So for us, for Trueface, it's 512 different characteristics of the proportions of landmarks on your face. That will be different across every single vendor in this space. And facial recognition actually was brought on about 1960. A guy by the name of Woodrow Wilson Bledsoe decided he was going to hand draw proportion analysis with side-by-side faces. So a pretty impressive thing to do in 1960. It wasn't until 1991 where we actually started using computers to run these proportion analyses. And then in 2002, the Super Bowl in Tampa, Florida, was the first real commercial use of facial recognition by the United States. This was something that turned out to be not such a good idea. They were looking for potential criminals and ended up having quite a few false positives in which the city was forced to shut the program down after about 3 months after the Super Bowl. It surfaced then again in 2010 when Facebook started researching if they could use facial recognition to auto-tag photos. As I'm sure many of you know now that they do this, and they do this very well. In 2014, they said that they could do it 97.6%, which was the same as the human eye could recognize. And then in 2015, Google came out and said they've had 100% accuracy. And for anyone that knows what happened in 2015, and I'll get to it in a couple slides here, Google was very mistaken. And with those accuracy numbers, you better be sure that you have 100%. In 2017, the iPhone X came out, and this was not the first handset that used facial recognition, but this was the first handset that turned facial recognition into a consumer technology. And the reason 2020 is up there because there are 650 million cameras in the world right now, cameras on street corners, cameras on computers, cameras on phones. In the next year, year and a half, there will be 1 billion cameras, which means that there's an incredible amount of infrastructure out there, but the one thing that they lack is scalable architecture to ingest that video footage and to make sense of it. So this just gives you an example of the transition of facial recognition from 1960 to now. It was literally hand drawings in 1960. The 1990s, it was running on a computer, probably something like a 56K, then into a DSL. So extremely slow, but able to make these very advanced calculations. And now we're at a point in time where we can take facial recognition, which is something that typically runs at 400 to 500 megabytes in size, shrink it down to 5 megabytes in size, and get it to run at the edge locally on infrastructure like a Raspberry Pi or other development boards. Where we're seeing this used right now is in smart home products for video doorbells to recognize people as they approach, and that runs entirely local on that unit, which is a very, very impressive thing. This is a very recent example. I was in Munich this past fall for Oktoberfest, and they've got hundreds of cameras that watch over this event. And I started asking around. I started poking questions with the individuals from the security team there about why they were not using facial recognition. And they told me, well, we've got it covered. We've got 27 super recognizers, so 27 people sitting in a facility monitoring camera feeds. And I did some more research and found out that 6 million people pass through this event. So I said, how is that possible? How do you have 27 people monitoring 6 million people? It just is not effective and it's not efficient. So there are restrictions around facial recognition right now at that event, but I think that next year or the following year, you'll start to see this technology in operation because it's a far more effective way to identify these potential threats. This is an example of what that could look like. This is a video from our technology. This is actually anonymous facial recognition. So we're not storing any personal information. We have a list of individuals who are potential threats in a certain environment. We do not have their names, we don't have their ages, their birthdays, their social security numbers, any information about them other than what their face looks like. So this is an anonymized way in which you can run facial recognition, thereby avoiding the privacy issue that people have when they assume that you're collecting information and storing it with their face. This gets us into the public concerns of facial recognition. The most important one is the personal information. How is it being stored? Where is it being stored? Who has access to it? Are you selling it? And given the recent events with Facebook, I think this is on a lot more people's minds than it ever was before. It's a very, very big issue when it comes to biometric storage and biometric information, which leads into privacy infringement. Is being watched in a city or in a private environment considered an infringement on your privacy? And one of the things that I want you to contemplate is you as a person own the right to your face. That is your face, that is your biometric identification tool. I, as the CEO of a company that runs a facial recognition algorithm, have a discrete way of identifying those metrics on your face. So it is my math that I take, analyze your face. The transition from your face to my database is technically now mine. And so that's a very large moral question that we're currently undergoing with regulation in the United States is, at the end of the day, who owns that data? Because that representation is actually mine. It has no identifiable characteristics to you. You cannot reverse engineer those numbers. You can't take those numbers and apply it to Amazon's recognition. Those numbers are very specific to that vendor. And so this privacy infringement and this personal information are becoming a very, very big topic in facial recognition. And then you get into mass surveillance and racial bias. Are we under mass surveillance? There are some countries that are under mass surveillance, yes. But for the most part, the world is not under mass surveillance. What it's under is an ability to detect threats in real time. So it's feeding in information that our governments have of known people of interest and using that to identify if there's a potential threat at a stadium, if there's a potential threat at an airport. And I generally do not think that we will get into a mass surveillance state. What I know about the United States government is the organization is lacking, and that would be very difficult for them to do. Let alone no facial recognition company that I know in the United States right now or even in Europe would allow that to happen. So, I'm not as concerned about the mass surveillance that I am about bias or personal privacy or the privacy infringement. And then into the bias. So in 2015, this was the Google example that I mentioned. They had claimed they had 100% face match accuracy. And face match is a one-to-one face match. It's how you unlock your phone. So it's taking one template and matching it with that person in real time to see if that matches. Well, Google got into a lot of trouble with gorillas being recognized as individuals. If you don't know about this event, it's worth looking up. It's humorous, but it's very sad. And so Google stopped selling that software shortly thereafter. They claimed they had a fix. It wasn't fixed, and they got into quite a bit of trouble for it. MIT Media Labs came out with a study in 2018 saying that facial recognition should not be used by governments because there is a bias in it, and that has a propensity to then target specific ethnicities or people of color, people that are not white Caucasian males. And the reason being is that the publicly available data sets that some of these companies were training their algorithms on were skewed 70% to 80% white male. So if your data in is skewed or biased, your data out is also going to be skewed and biased. And that leads us into 2019, which is where we are today. You have a magnitude of open source data sets. They're all biased. And so it's on that company to go out, find, and source proportionately balanced data so that you can provide an algorithm that does not have this data bias. If we continue to use public data, that's going to be the consequence. One of the ways in which we do this is a new advancement. I think I heard someone earlier talk about it in here. It's called generative adversarial networks. So when you create these data sets, or when you create data sets in general, you can take them from three places. You can take it from the public, like I mentioned. There's IMDb out there, which has a public data set of all celebrities and movies. You've got a variety of other, I think Microsoft and IBM both have data sets that are available to download. And then you've got private data sets, which you go to clients to get clients provide that data back to you. You can train algorithms to make them specific to that use case. Or you can go out and collect your own. And the third is the GANs. The nexus of all these things, or the center of all these things, is how you get your performance. It's how you get your speed, your accuracy, and the reduction in bias. So I'd like to ask all of you, how many people here think that one or two images are fake in this? A show of hands would be great. How many think 3 or 4 are fake? How many think all are fake? All are fake. It's a pretty impressive thing to know that all of these images are not real people. Not a single person here exists. And this is the power of what a GAN is. This is an example of a GAN working. You basically take a ton of data, a ton of faces. You feed it into an algorithm. This algorithm strips out those proportions and then recreates a face from those proportions. So it's an extremely impressive way of generating data. Not only is it impressive, it's scalable, and you can customize that data set. So if you say, I need people that are 16 to 22 years in age that look this way, with a mustache and long hair, this will output that. So you have now a way to create the data that you need for that specific use case at scale for a very low cost, and you eliminate the bias. So what does this mean? This means that facial recognition is coming. It's here right now, but it's coming based on edge computing power, the advancements in these cameras that are being deployed, 3D computing, and just really taking what was traditionally a very, very heavy footprint, a very heavy box, and allowing it to run in real time on this infrastructure. That, with custom data collection, allows this technology to work in real time across the world and to provide the feedback necessary to make decisions. Those decisions could be for access control, they could be for threat detection, they could be convenience, and we'll get into a couple more of those now. So specifically for travel, the efficiency that this can bring to travel. I'm sure many of you have been through an airport. You're starting to see facial recognition for baggage drop, for entry points into gates. I was recently at LAX and flying to Heathrow. I didn't have to show a passport or a boarding pass to enter my plane. And what they have found is that a typical 777 from LAX to Heathrow takes about 50 minutes to board, 50. It takes 25 minutes to board with facial recognition. It's an extremely impressive number there to reduce the travel time and frustration from 50 to 25 minutes. The safety in schools and in stadiums. In the United States, we're having a very, very big problem with schools, as I'm sure some of you have heard in the news. There are many threats at schools these days, from children bringing guns to schools to people that should not be there going into these schools. So facial recognition is a way to ensure that we have the proper people in those schools, that the teachers are there, that the students are there, but that no one is unauthorized, hasn't entered that building. And then fraud reduction. The banks all over the world are heavily investing in facial recognition technology to reduce fraud. That's both digital fraud, that's ATM fraud, that's desktop fraud, and that's in retail fraud. And then convenience. I mean, this is a no-brainer. If we could eliminate passwords and have facial recognition be used as your password for everything, would that not make life a ton simpler? And the question that's always asked here is, well, what if your face or your identity in a facial recognition algorithm is compromised? Do I lose my face? Can anyone just go take that? The short answer is that's not even close to how this works. As I said earlier, a facial recognition company creates a template of your face, a mathematical representation of your face. If that specific mathematical representation is compromised, they delete that file, they put it in the trash like they would on a computer, and they reissue one. It's going to be a new string of 512 different digits. So it's as simple as just deleting that password. And then security and automation. These go one in one here. Security being things like home protection, knowing who's coming to your house. We're seeing, smart doorbells have been around now since about 2012, 2013. They're starting to deliver facial recognition as a way to gain access, but also a way to prevent people from entering their home when they're not there. What I mean by that is 80% of home invasion in the United States, that burglar or robber or that person trying to attack actually knocks or rings the doorbell first to see if anyone's home. And so there are innovative companies in the US right now that are putting speakers just inside the door to either play music, to make it sound like a dog is barking, to say hello in a human voice. It's a way to try and deter that potential robber, that potential threat from coming in. And then automation is access control. We work with clients now who have thousands of people entering a building every day, and that takes roughly 45 minutes in the morning rush to enter. With facial recognition, we think we can get that down to about 15 minutes. So it's a significant way to improve the efficiency of these buildings or of this access control. This is an example of that airport what I was talking about. You simply walk up, look at the camera, and within 3 seconds, you board the plane. They're taking that information from when you registered for that flight. They have your passport information on file, and they have your passport picture. So it's a very, very simple process. Safety, I mentioned this earlier, it's the schools. We have a shooting roughly every 4 or 5 days in the United States in a school. So there were about 100 gun incidences in 2018. It's a staggering number, and it's a number that has to change for us. But this is largely in part due to people that should not be on that campus at that time, and people that gain access to that campus, after hours, they scope the campus out. And so if we had this technology running on these schools, we could, effectively deter and eliminate these types of events from happening. And the reason that we can do this is there's a privacy risk around schools and recognizing children. But as I mentioned earlier, we can anonymize that identification, and we can actually blur technology, or blur faces in real time. So if we know they're not a threat, we make that data fleeting, meaning it's eliminated before it's processed, and it's not stored anywhere. So we are not collecting biometrics of these students. It's only if there is a threat from that person that we previously know about. And then fraud reduction. We're seeing this at ATMs all around the world now. Imagine walking up to an ATM, looking at it, punching in your code, it recognizing you, and you being able to pull money out and walk away. It's a significant reduction in time that you spend at the ATM, but it's also a very, very protected and secure way of accessing your account, one in which we have trouble with today. This would eliminate fraud from ATMs. It would eliminate people using your credit card online that doesn't have access to it. And so it's a really powerful way for banks to start reducing that shrinkage that they have from fraud. And then convenience. As I mentioned earlier, this is the password piece. If you're able to log into all of your devices, walk into a bank, and you use the same credential to gain access to everything, it just makes our lives that much easier. If you could walk into a store and pay with your face and walk out like Amazon Go, how many people would go shopping that way? It makes things significantly easier in your life, and it's more secure than the current form of payment. And then security. So this is an actual image from a home doorbell. This is identifying the person that's there, so it's a known visitor. We know who it is. You can play audio back to them if you want to say hi, welcome, the door is unlocked. So think about Airbnb or home sharing opportunities. You can just pass this credential through that platform, and then they have access to your house. You don't have to meet them there with a key or have someone set up with a key. So it's a great way to verify who's visiting your house, or if you've got a package left, identifying that the package has been there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or if that package is taken, you'll be able to see and detect who that package is taken by. Access control, as I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty simple thing to wrap your head around. It's a way of authenticating you, either single factor or multi-factor. So a lot of construction sites are using facial recognition now for their workers. They've got hundreds of workers coming in there on a daily basis. They badge with one hand, they look at the camera, and the door opens. The badge is to run a one-to-one match instead of a one-to-n match. So as I mentioned earlier, the face match is one-to-one. It's how you unlock your phone. One-to-n means that we're looking for people in a crowd, or we're looking for people amongst many. So it's one face amongst n. So 1,000, 10,000, 1 million. To give you an example of the speed in which this technology works, my company specifically can scan through 1 billion faces in 1 second to find an individual. So with that power of computing, this becomes real-time decision-making. The future of facial recognition, as I see it right now, 3D recognition will become very apparent in our lives. The issue with 3D recognition is the sensors out there are all 2D at this stage. So you've got 650 million cameras with 1 billion being deployed. The vast majority are 2D. And so until infrastructure changes on a scale, this won't be that meaningful. I would say roughly 5 to 10 years before we have an infrastructure overhaul. Real-time personal experiences is something I'm very excited about and we're working on. It's probably about 5 years out, but you can imagine an environment where you walk into a store, you walk into a mall, and you're receiving personalized ads in real time based on things that you've shopped for. This would obviously be an opt-in use case because you can't just run this technology on anyone. And so having an opt-in approach is something that's very important to one of those earlier points of privacy and infringement on your rights. So opting in is something like where you've got your Instagram feed, you've got all of your friends' pictures, and you see an ad that's very relevant to you. This is what we're working on with retailers right now. So it's to have extremely hyper-relative ads in those spaces if you've opted in based on who you are, what you've purchased, and what we think you might like. Automated processes I've touched on now. So in the past 2-3 months, that has become a very present form of facial recognition. Regulation and package solutions. Package solutions, what I mean by that is using facial recognition with age recognition, with object detection, with license plate recognition. So taking one solution that is typically in microservices or a compartmentalized solution, combining it into one, and making that run at the edge so you have all those data points needed to make a decision. That's about a year out from happening. And regulation. I'm all for regulation. But we just had a law passed in California yesterday, or 2 days ago now, that is banning the use of facial recognition by the local law enforcement. And the ban is actually not a ban. What it is they now have to use facial recognition like a warrant for someone's arrest. So they have to go get judge approval to use facial recognition on their cities. Now, the police forces there are fighting back, saying that we've caught X amount of individuals who have committed crimes with this technology. Why would you ban it? But San Francisco, being the city that it is very focused on its law-abiding citizens. And so they want to ensure that there is regulation, there is a discussion around privacy before they just let the local law enforcement go wild with this technology. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I think this should be federally regulated or regulated by someone like the United Nations, where we've got one consensus on how facial recognition can be used among a variety of industries, because defense departments use it very differently than iPhones do, and that they use it very differently than Facebook does. So there's a variety of applications within facial recognition, and it's important to delineate or to verticalize those implementations when you do regulate this technology. This is just an example of how this technology works with the age. Age recognition right now is at a mean average error of 2.5 years. This footage is from the 1960s, and we're still able to pull those numbers. So it's incredibly powerful when you talk about the retail environment. If you're buying alcohol and tobacco, instead of having to show a form of identification, we now know within 2.5 years what your age is based on just your face. So combining this with things like emotion analysis and facial recognition becomes a very powerful solution. So it's important for me to leave you with one last thing, and this technology and computer vision in general is only adopted on a mass scale when it's used responsibly. It's very, very important that there are checks and balances when it comes to facial recognition and how it's deployed. So if this technology is used responsibly, we're very confident that we can provide a safer and smarter world for everyone. Thank you.